Humanity's first true introduction to the wider galaxy did not happen with a grand welcome, or with respect for their struggles and achievements. Instead, it came with laughter. The moment Earth sent its first representatives to the interstellar council, they were greeted not with handshakes but with smirks, raised brows, and quiet chuckles from species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. To them, humans were latecomers, primitive, and far too fragile to be taken seriously. When Earth's ships docked at the orbital station of the Council, their design drew immediate mockery. Human vessels were boxy, metallic, and built with what others considered crude engineering. They were powered by fusion drives, technology that was thousands of years behind the sleek antimatter engines of the advanced civilizations. While alien ships glided like works of art, glowing with elegance, human ships looked more like armored containers bolted together. In the great assembly hall, representatives from across the stars sat in their shimmering robes and energy-woven garments. The humans wore simple suits stitched on Earth, their colors muted compared to the radiant designs of their counterparts. They spoke with firm voices, but many aliens did not even try to hide their amusement. To them, humans were just a curious novelty, like children who had stumbled into an adult gathering. Whispers spread quickly across the chamber. "Their ships cannot even bend space properly," some murmured. "They still use chemical propellants. For smaller craft," others laughed. "Their weapons, kinetic projectiles. They throw bits of metal through space at high speeds like barbarians with stones." The laughter grew louder when records of human military history were shown. Wars, fought with rifles, tanks, aircraft, and missiles, seemed absurd to species that had long abandoned such primitive toys. The idea that humans still relied on slug throwers instead of refined beams of plasma or gravity lances was the punchline of endless jokes. For many in the galaxy, war itself had become distant. They had built fleets so powerful and automated that battles were fought more like rituals than struggles for survival. Entire wars could be decided by a few skirmishes, with advanced ships calculating victory before the first shot was fired. To them, humanity's bloody and chaotic past was not a sign of resilience. It was a sign of backwardness. News channels across different planets played segments of human history, laughing at how Earth had nearly destroyed itself countless times, in conflicts. Talk shows described humans as reckless, unable to control their own violent nature. To the galaxy, they were not warriors. They were entertainers. Humanity had become a cosmic joke, something to laugh at when the council debates grew too dull. And yet, behind the mockery, humanity remained silent. The representatives listened, their expressions calm, even though deep down they could feel the sting of humiliation. They knew the galaxy saw them as weak, but they also knew something the others did not. Humans had not survived because of elegance or overwhelming technology. They had survived because of something far deeper, an ability to endure, to adapt, and to fight even when all odds were against them. Still, the disrespect was constant. When humans offered to contribute to joint security missions, the proposal was waved aside. "Perhaps you can help with logistics," one alien suggested, as if speaking to a servant. "Or maybe you could send food rations. Your planet still grows crops in soil, does it not?" The chamber erupted in quiet laughter again. At one gathering, when human officers presented their weapon systems, the reaction was even harsher. Alien commanders laughed at the idea of launching solid projectiles instead of relying on energy beams. "Your weapons are ancient," they said, "obsolete, a relic of a violent past." They saw no threat in human guns, no danger in their missiles, no wisdom in their strategies. But what the aliens missed was the heart behind those weapons. For humans, every rifle, every missile, every ship was not just a tool of war. It was the result of centuries of survival. Unlike many species who had lived in comfort under stable skies, humans had fought nature itself, disasters, disease, and each other, and still managed to rise. Their weapons were not elegant, but they were reliable, powerful, and made to work in the harshest conditions. That truth remained invisible to the galaxy. All they saw was weakness. All they heard was laughter. Yet even among the mockery, a quiet tension began to grow. Some alien observers, the ones who studied wars and conflicts, noticed a different pattern. When they watched recordings of human history, they saw not just chaos, but also resilience. They saw soldiers holding their ground when outnumbered, civilians rebuilding cities after devastation, explorers crossing dangerous seas and skies. They saw a species that refused to give up, no matter how hopeless the situation, but their warnings were ignored. "They are too emotional, too reckless," the council said. "They will never stand against true power." So the laughter continued. Humans became the subject of alien comedy, late-night entertainment across different worlds. The Terrans, they called them, fighters with sticks and stones in a world of light. What the galaxy did not realize was that every word, every insult, every burst of laughter was being remembered by humanity. They might not have shown anger in those halls, but behind closed doors, human officers and scientists were taking notes. They were listening, watching, and preparing. The mockery only fueled their determination. If the galaxy wanted to laugh, let them laugh. If they wanted to see humans as primitive, let them. Humanity had endured far worse than laughter. They had been underestimated before, countless times in their own history. And every time they had risen stronger. Deep within human space, military leaders gathered, not to weep over the insults, but to plan. Their fleets might have been small, their weapons mocked, but they had something no one else did: the human spirit. They knew that one day, whether by chance or challenge, they would be tested. And when that day came, the galaxy would finally see the truth. For now, though, they endured the mockery. They let the galaxy laugh. But beneath the quiet expressions and polite smiles of their representatives, there was an unshakable fire. Humanity was waiting, humanity was ready, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The mockery of humanity had gone on for months, echoing across star systems, repeated in broadcasts, and whispered in the great council chambers. But the time came when words and laughter gave way to something far more serious. A threat emerged at the edge of the galaxy, and with it, humanity's chance to prove themselves. It began with the Creel, a species feared for their aggression and ruthless expansion. For years, the Creel had been silent, lurking beyond the trade routes, watching the stars. Then suddenly, their fleets appeared on the borders of Allied space. Their ships were jagged, dark, and built for war, each one bristling with weapons. The Creel did not come to negotiate. They came to conquer. The council panicked. Messages rushed back and forth between worlds. Armies were called, fleets mobilized. But even the strongest civilizations hesitated, for the Creel were not like the other threats the galaxy had faced. They did not fight according to rules or treaties. They attacked with a savagery that shocked even the most experienced commanders. The humans watched as the council debated endlessly. Many species wanted to retreat, to protect their own worlds instead of risking open war. Others believed they could negotiate, though the Creel had already destroyed 2 colonies without warning. Among the shouting and indecision, a small voice rose from the human delegation. "We will fight," the human commander said simply. The room fell silent. Some sneered, others laughed quietly as they had before. But the humans did not waver. They knew this was their chance, not only to defend the innocent, but to show the galaxy who they truly were. Soon after, the first joint fleet was assembled. Human ships were placed at the outer edge, not because of strategy, but because the other commanders still saw them as expendable. "Let them take the first hit," one alien general whispered. "If the Creel destroy them, it changes nothing. If by chance they survive, it will keep the enemy distracted." The humans heard these words, but said nothing. They had been underestimated before, and they knew how to turn it to their advantage. The first clash came at the edge of a barren star system. A fleet of Creel ships emerged, moving like predators in a pack. Their weapons lit the void with streaks of deadly energy. The Allied fleet formed its defense, with the humans at the front line. At first, it seemed as if the predictions of the Council were correct. Alien commanders watched the screens, shaking their heads as Creel fire slammed into the human ships. The boxy vessels shuddered under the impact, their armor glowing from heat. "They will not last 5 minutes," someone muttered. But then something unexpected happened. The humans fought back. Their weapons, mocked as primitive, unleashed a fury the galaxy had not seen in centuries. Railguns spat slugs at near-light speed, tearing through Creel armor that was designed to resist energy beams but not solid projectiles. Missiles streaked across the void, each one splitting into swarms of smaller warheads that hunted down their targets. Creel ships erupted in fireballs as explosions rippled through their hulls. What the galaxy had forgotten was that humans had perfected the art of kinetic warfare. While others relied on elegant beams of light, humans trusted in raw impact. The sheer unstoppable force of mass and velocity. To the Creel, it was devastating. Alien commanders watching the battle widened their eyes. They had never seen such ferocity, such relentless precision. Human ships moved in tight formations, covering one another, sacrificing damaged craft to shield allies. Every strike was calculated. Every maneuver carried the weight of survival instinct. The Creel tried to overwhelm them with numbers, but the humans adapted quickly. They used tactics born from centuries of desperate wars, ambushes, feints, sudden bursts of aggression followed by strategic retreats. They fought not like machines but like survivors, unpredictable and fierce. For the first time, the Creel hesitated. Their advance slowed. Their commanders, so confident in their overwhelming power, realized these primitive humans were far more dangerous than anyone had believed. The other Council fleets, who had been holding back, suddenly found themselves inspired. Seeing the humans charge forward with such determination lit a spark in them. They pushed into the battle with renewed courage, striking harder than they had in years. Still, the humans bore the heaviest burden. Their ships took blow after blow, shields cracking, hulls breaking, but they refused to fall back. They pressed forward, forcing the Creel into chaos. At one point, a heavily damaged human battleship, its engines burning, rammed directly into a Creel cruiser. The explosion tore through both ships, but it broke the enemy line wide open, giving the fleet a chance to strike deep. The moment spread across the galaxy in real time. Broadcasts that had once mocked humanity now showed their bravery live. Billions watched as the so-called weak Terrans stood against one of the most feared empires in the galaxy and refused to bend. The laughter stopped. By the end of the battle, the Creel fleet was in retreat. Wreckage drifted across the void, and the silence of space was filled only with the fading echoes of destruction. The Allied fleet had survived, battered but standing, and at its heart, the humans remained. Their losses were heavy, but their spirit was unbroken. In the aftermath, whispers spread across the Council. "Did you see what they did?" one alien asked. "They fought like nothing we've seen before. Their weapons, their courage, it was unlike anything else." But the humans did not boast. They returned to their ships quietly, carrying their wounded, honoring their dead. To them, the battle was not about glory. It was about survival, about protecting lives that could have been lost if they had hesitated. For the first time, the galaxy began to see them differently. The mockery had turned to silence, and silence was the first step toward respect. And yet, this was only the beginning. Humanity had shown a glimpse of what they were capable of, but the galaxy still did not fully understand. They had seen their weapons, their courage, but not yet the depth of their resilience. That revelation was still to come, waiting in the battles ahead. For now, though, the first clash had ended, and the galaxy would never forget it. The galaxy thought it had seen everything in the first clash. Humans had fought with unexpected skill, and their weapons had proven far more dangerous than the Council ever believed. But that battle only scratched the surface. What came next revealed something far deeper, something hidden inside humanity that no one had anticipated. The Creel were not finished. Though they had retreated after the first clash, their pride was wounded. They were not the kind of enemy to admit defeat. In their culture, retreat was only a pause before striking harder. Within weeks, their forces returned, larger than before, their commanders determined to crush the alliance once and for all. This time, the Council prepared more cautiously. Fleets were reinforced, new defenses were arranged, and commanders who once doubted the humans now quietly requested their presence on the front lines. But even with this preparation, fear lingered in the air. The Creel had numbers, they had power, and most of all, they had anger. In the middle of this storm, the humans stood calmly. They did not appear shaken. To outsiders, it almost seemed strange. How could a species so young, so fragile compared to the ancient empires of the galaxy, walk into such a battle with steady steps? The answer, as the galaxy soon learned, was hidden not in their weapons or their ships, but in their spirit. The second confrontation began in the dark reaches of space near a dying star. The Creel arrived in a massive wave, their ships blotting. Out the light, their weapons charging with a deadly glow. The Allied fleet braced itself, but again the humans volunteered for the most dangerous positions. They took the vanguard, not because they were ordered, but because they chose it. The Creel attacked first, unleashing a storm of fire. Explosions tore through space as the front lines lit up with destruction. Human ships absorbed the worst of it, their armor cracking, their shields collapsing. From the command rooms of other species, the scene looked hopeless. Surely the humans would break this time, but they didn't. Instead of falling apart, the humans pressed forward. Their ships, damaged and scarred, kept advancing. Some moved with half their engines burning, yet still pushed into the heart of the enemy line. Where other species might have retreated to regroup, the humans refused to give ground. They fought, with a stubbornness that shocked even their allies. That was the first glimpse of their hidden strength, their ability to endure. Human resilience was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Wounds that should have crippled them only seemed to make them fight harder. A battleship with holes through its hull still fired every weapon it had. Smaller craft, almost shattered, acted as decoys to draw fire away from their allies. Even when entire squadrons were lost, the humans reorganized in moments, adapting without hesitation. It wasn't just strategy, it was something deeper, something that lived in their very nature. Humanity carried within them a long history of surviving against impossible odds. On their home world, through wars, through disasters. To them, pain was not the end. Loss was not surrender. They had learned, generation after generation, that strength was not measured only in victory, but in how one rose after being struck down. The Creel were not ready for this. Their culture was built on domination, on breaking enemies quickly and moving on. They expected fear. They expected surrender. What they faced instead was defiance. Every time they struck, the humans rose again. Every time they tried to break. Their spirit, the humans, only grew more determined. As the battle dragged on, another layer of human strength emerged. Their creativity. Where many species relied on centuries-old traditions of warfare, humans improvised constantly. They used asteroids as shields, slingshotting around them to launch surprise attacks. They rerouted failing systems in ways no alien engineer would dare attempt. Pilots came up with maneuvers so reckless that Council tacticians gasped. Yet somehow, they worked. The galaxy began to realize something vital. Humans did not just follow rules. They bent them, broke them, and rewrote them in the heat of the moment. That unpredictability made them terrifying opponents. The turning moment of this battle came when a massive Creel warship, larger than anything the Allies had faced before, charged into the fight. Its weapons ripped through Allied lines, scattering ships. Even the bravest captains hesitated, unsure how to counter such overwhelming force. But not the humans. A group of human ships, already battered, formed a desperate plan. They maneuvered dangerously close to the warship, dodging its fire by inches. Instead of fleeing, they launched a coordinated strike, not at its shields or its weapons, but at its engines. They knew if they could cripple its movement, the rest of the fleet could bring it down. The attack was suicidal. Many of the human ships were destroyed instantly, yet they pressed on. One frigate, its hull torn open, rammed into the Creel warship's side, detonating its reactor in a blinding flash. The explosion ripped through the enemy vessel, slowing it just enough for the Allied fleet to focus fire. Within minutes, the giant collapsed into flames. The galaxy watched in awe. What struck them most was not the destruction of the Creel warship, but the willingness of humans to sacrifice everything for victory. They fought not as individuals seeking glory, but as a united force willing to give their lives for the survival of others. That selflessness was a strength few other species could understand. When the Creel finally withdrew again, bloodied and humiliated, the council chambers were silent. For the second time, humanity had stood at the front, taken the hardest blows, and refused to break. But this time, the galaxy saw something deeper. They saw that the true strength of humans did not lie only in weapons or tactics, but in their spirit, the hidden power that made them impossible to conquer. In the days that followed, stories spread like wildfire. Soldiers whispered about human bravery. Commanders told of their resilience. Civilians across worlds replayed footage of human ships charging into impossible fights. What had once been mockery was now admiration, but the humans themselves remained quiet. They did not ask for praise. They mourned their losses, honored their dead, and prepared for what was to come. For they knew the war was not over. The Creel would return, stronger and angrier. And when they did, humanity would be ready again. The galaxy now looked at humans with new eyes. They were no longer seen as weak or naive. They were something far more dangerous, something the galaxy had not expected. A species with strength hidden not just in their weapons, but in their hearts. And for the first time, many began to wonder if this was only the beginning of humanity's strength. What more were they capable of? The war between the Alliance and the Creel had reached a breaking point. For weeks, both sides had clashed again and again, neither gaining a true advantage. The Creel attacked with their usual arrogance, believing that sheer numbers and brute force would eventually crush all resistance. The Alliance, however, had something the Creel had never faced before: humanity. Still, even with human courage and creativity, the strain was showing. Fleets were stretched thin, supply lines were under constant attack, and morale among the Allied forces wavered. Many species whispered in council chambers that perhaps resistance was hopeless. The Creel were too strong, too relentless. The Alliance could not endure forever. It was in this darkest hour that the humans began to shape the turning point of the war. The battle that would change everything took place in a star system on the edge of Allied space. The Creel launched a massive offensive, sending a fleet so large it dwarfed anything the Allies had seen before. The very sight of it filled commanders with dread. They feared this might be the final push, the blow that would shatter their fragile resistance. The humans, however, did not flinch. They studied the enemy fleet, noted its weaknesses, and began to plan. For them, this was not just another fight. It was a chance to prove, once and for all, that humanity could not be broken. When the battle began, the Creel came forward with overwhelming force. Their ships moved like a tidal wave, pouring fire into the Allied lines. Explosions lit up the void as smaller vessels were torn apart. Many fleets began to falter, retreating to avoid annihilation. But the humans held their ground. At the very front, their ships formed a barrier, drawing the Creel's fire. Again and again, their vessels were hit, shields collapsing, hulls shattering. Yet somehow, they endured. To the other species watching, it seemed madness. Why throw themselves into the center of the storm? But the humans knew what they were doing. They were baiting the Creel, pulling them deeper, stretching their formation. And when the Creel were overextended, the humans struck back. Their strategy was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Instead of fighting defensively, the humans used daring maneuvers that defied all logic. Small strike groups dove straight into the heart of the enemy fleet, weaving between massive warships, striking at weak points, then vanishing before the Creel could respond. It was chaotic, reckless, and completely unpredictable. The Creel commanders, trained in rigid discipline, could not keep up. Their fleets were built for overwhelming power, not adaptability. Against the humans' wild and unorthodox tactics, their formation began to crumble. But this was not the true turning point. That came when the Creel unleashed their ultimate weapon. At the center of their fleet was a colossal warship, larger than any the Allies had ever faced. Its firepower was devastating, tearing apart entire squadrons with a single volley. When it entered the fight, panic swept through the Allied ranks. If this ship broke their lines, the battle, and perhaps the war, would be lost. The humans did not panic. Instead, they made a decision so bold, so dangerous, that no other species would have dared attempt it. They would take the warship head-on. A group of human ships, already battered from the fight, volunteered for the mission. They knew it might be their last stand, but they did not hesitate. To them, survival meant little if the rest of the galaxy fell. Their duty was clear. The plan was simple, yet nearly impossible. They would distract the Creel warship, draw its attention, and strike at its engines to cripple its movement. Once it was slowed, the rest of the fleet could focus their fire and bring it down. The charge began. Human ships darted forward, weaving through deadly fire. One by one they were hit, but the survivors pressed on. The warship's cannons lit up the battlefield, yet the humans never faltered. They flew closer than anyone dared, targeting weak points in the armor, launching strike after strike. Then came the moment that stunned the galaxy. One human frigate, its hull torn apart, engines failing, refused to retreat. Instead, its captain ordered the crew to hold course. The ship, blazing with fire, slammed directly into the Creel warship's side. The impact triggered its reactor, exploding in a blinding flash that shook the battlefield. The Creel warship staggered, its shields collapsed, its engines sputtered, and in that instant, the rest of the Allied fleet unleashed everything they had. A storm of firepower tore into the giant until, finally, with one last thunderous explosion, it was destroyed. The battle paused in silence. For a moment, even the Creel seemed stunned. That warship was meant to be unstoppable. To see it fall, to see it destroyed by human sacrifice, was a shock that rippled through the enemy ranks. The Allies felt it too. What had seemed hopeless now burned with possibility. The humans had shown that even the greatest weapon of the Creel could be defeated. That one act of defiance became the spark that turned fear into courage. The Allied fleets rallied. Renewed by human bravery, they surged forward, striking with everything they had. Species that once doubted now fought with fierce determination. Together, they pushed the Creel back, driving them from the system. When the battle ended, the field was littered with wreckage. Countless lives had been lost, But for the first time, the Creel had not won. They had been forced to retreat. The tide of the war had shifted. The humans did not celebrate with grand speeches or demand glory. They honored their fallen, mourned their sacrifices, and quietly returned to prepare for what came next. But across the galaxy, the story spread. Everyone had seen the moment when humans turned the impossible into reality. The turning point of the battle was not just the destruction of a warship. It was the moment the galaxy understood the true power of humanity. Their courage to stand where others would flee, their willingness to sacrifice for the greater good, and their refusal to bow to fear. From that day forward, the Creel no longer underestimated humans. They feared them, and the rest of the galaxy began to look at humanity with awe, wondering just how far this species of survivors could go. The war was not over, but its course had changed, and it all began with the turning point, the moment when humans showed. That strength was not just measured in weapons, but in the unbreakable fire within their hearts. The battle was over, but its echoes stretched far beyond the shattered star system where it had taken place. The Creel fleet had been forced to retreat, their pride wounded and their arrogance shaken. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy had witnessed them stumble, and at the heart of that victory stood humanity. Ships drifted among the wreckage, many damaged, some nothing more than broken shells. Rescue teams moved tirelessly, searching for survivors, bringing the wounded home and honoring those who had fallen. The silence after the chaos felt heavy, like the entire universe was holding its breath. No one spoke of triumph. Instead, there was quiet respect for the cost, for the lives given, and for the moment that had changed everything. The humans did not boast. They did not demand recognition. Instead, they mourned their dead with solemn rituals, placing names into records that would never be forgotten. To them, every sacrifice had meaning, and that meaning was not glory, it was survival, unity, and the promise of a better future. But across the galaxy, others spoke of the humans differently. News of the battle spread quickly, carried on transmissions, whispered in council chambers, repeated in distant colonies. Stories of a single frigate throwing itself into the enemy's greatest warship spread like fire. Different species retold the tale in their own words, but the essence remained the same. Humans had faced the impossible, and they had not only endured, they had prevailed. For centuries, the Creel had been seen as untouchable, an unstoppable storm sweeping across the stars. Entire civilizations had bent to their will or been erased. Yet here, in this battle, their illusion of invincibility had cracked. And it was humanity, the young and underestimated species, that had struck the blow. The legacy of that moment grew larger with each retelling. Allied commanders studied the humans' tactics, trying to understand the daring maneuvers that had turned the tide. Some called them reckless, others brilliant. But what none could deny was that the humans had revealed a new way to fight, a way that relied not on overwhelming power, but on creativity, adaptability, and a willingness to risk everything for the chance to win. Other species, inspired by this, began to rethink their own strategies. Fleets that once relied on cautious defense started experimenting with bold new ideas. Leaders who once hesitated now found courage. It was as if humanity had lit a fire in the hearts of all who had witnessed them. Yet the greatest legacy was not military. It was human spirit. For too long, the galaxy had measured strength by the size of fleets, the weight of weapons, the scale of destruction. But humanity had shown something different. They had shown that true power lay not only in machines, but in the hearts of those who wielded them. Their courage, their unity, and their refusal to surrender had proven stronger than the Creel's arrogance. That was what lingered in the minds of those who survived. In the months that followed, alliances grew stronger. Where once the humans had been seen as newcomers, too young and too fragile to be taken seriously. Now they were given seats of honor in councils. Their voices were sought, their opinions respected. Many species who had doubted them now looked at them with a mix of awe and gratitude. The Creel, on the other hand, did not forget. Their leaders raged in silence, humiliated by the loss. They swore vengeance, plotting their return. Yet even they knew the galaxy had changed. No longer could they rely on fear to crush resistance. The humans had shattered that illusion. If one battle could be won, then others could too. On Earth, the story of the battle became part of human history. Monuments were built to honor the fallen, their names etched into stone and memory. Families wept for their loved ones, but also carried pride that their sacrifice had helped turn the tide of a war that spanned across the stars. Children grew up hearing the stories, learning that courage was not about being fearless, but about standing firm even when fear consumed you. It was not just about war. The legacy also shaped peace. Diplomats began using the human example in negotiations, reminding others that unity could achieve what fear never could. Colonies that once lived in isolation reached out to one another, forging connections, sharing knowledge, building trust. The galaxy, scarred by conflict, began to feel the first small steps toward hope. The Creel still loomed as a threat. Everyone knew the war was far from over. But now there was belief that victory was possible, and belief was a powerful weapon. For humanity, the battle had proven something vital, not only to the galaxy, but to themselves. They were no longer the newcomers of the stars. They were no longer underestimated. They were seen for what they truly were: survivors, fighters, and dreamers. A species that could endure the darkest storms and still find a way to rise. The legacy of the battle lived on in the simplest of ways. In the songs sung by those who remembered, in the stories whispered by soldiers to one another in the quiet before the next fight, in the determination of leaders who refused to bow to fear, in the silent prayers of families who knew the cost but accepted it for the sake of tomorrow. Generations later, long after the war had ended, historians would look back on that single clash and call it the beginning of a new era, not because of the ships destroyed or the tactics used, but because of the spirit it revealed. The moment when humanity proved not only to the galaxy, but to themselves, that they belonged among the stars. And even when monuments crumbled, when records faded, when time buried the details in dust, the legacy endured in something far greater. It endured in the hearts of all who carried within them the lesson of that day, that courage could outshine fear, that sacrifice could inspire generations, and that no power in the galaxy could break the will of humanity. The Creel had laughed at humans once. They had mocked their small fleets, their fragile bodies, their limited reach. But after the battle, no one laughed anymore. Instead, they remembered. They remembered the fire in human eyes, the unshakable resolve in their actions, and the truth that echoed through the stars. Humanity was far more than anyone had believed, and their legacy was only just beginning.